Hello, welcome back to History Speaks. Hope everyone's doing well. Today I'm starting a new series where I take a look at the book that's on your screen here, The Arab Role in Africa. And this is pretty different from the stuff I've uploaded previously, so if you've watched that, you might be a little bit confused. Basically, I stopped recording the Plutarch series because the microphone I had was it was awful. It was so bad I couldn't even listen to the recordings back. So this at the beginning of the semester, I went out and I got an Elgato microphone, which I'm using to record the audio that you're listening to right now. And I think, as you can hear, it is significantly better. I'll probably go back and re-record some of the old Plutarch videos. I still think that's a valuable project, but my interests have shifted a little bit since I recorded a lot of the Greek and Roman stuff. I've been researching the history of Islam, Southwest Asia, and some of the important ethnicities in that region, Arabs, Turks, Persians, Berbers, those kind of people. And this is the first video of what I hope will be a productive direction for the channel, where I really want to try to work through the history of Western and Central Asia. It's a topic that doesn't get very much systematic coverage on YouTube, or at least not very much that I've encountered. If you know of any good channels on the topic, go ahead and drop them in the comment section. And I think there's quite a lot of interesting history that just doesn't really get much exposure. And so in my opinion, it also helps make sense of a lot of the European and Western history that a lot of you are probably familiar with. So what I want to do is basically start uploading videos where I kind of document my self-education on that topic, and I hope you'll join me for that. As a way to start, I'm going to record a series of readings where I take a look at a couple of books I've found pretty interesting in the course of my research. They're both about Arabs in Africa, or African Arabs, but in different ways. They're both written around the same time in the middle of the 20th century. And the book that we'll be taking a look at today is called The Arab Role in Africa. I found it at my university's library. It seems to be very obscure. The little author biography on the screen is from the kind of front cover of the, or like the first couple pages of the book. It's more information than I was able to find about him online, so you can pause the video and read that if you like. And I also couldn't find a good picture of him. The copy I have the copy of the book that I have has a kind of black and white photograph, it basically looks like blobs. You wouldn't be able to recognize him if you knew him. It looks awful. So I used the book cover here as the highest resolution picture of it I could find. But nevertheless, it's quite interesting to see what the author has to say. I hope that you'll listen and give your thoughts. The situation in Africa as it relates to the Arab countries, and especially the African Arab countries, was pretty different, and it's quite interesting to see what the author considers to be important trends. There's some trends that he names that looked inevitable, and with hindsight, we can look back and say, oh, that was never going to happen. But it's not obvious at the moment. On the other hand, there are certain observations that he makes that still carry weight today. So I think on balance, it's a really interesting snapshot of what the world looked like during the Cold War. And in my opinion, it's always good to revisit such things. Even if they are outdated, it helps us to remind ourselves that predictions, news, analysis, these are all just tools, and they can be useful, but the people who are promoting them, they're just guessing like everyone else. And so you should never take everything that the kind of intellectuals of the day say is the stone cold gospel truth. So that's basically what I think the relevance is. Most of the first half of the book focuses on Egypt. At the time that it was written, Egypt was a real cultural powerhouse. It was starting to develop economically into kind of a political economy powerhouse as well. And it, it was influential in a way that it kind of isn't today. And so reading this, one of my biggest takeaways was a new appreciation for how effective of a leader Gamal Abdel Nasser, he was the president of Egypt for a long time, just how effective of a leader he was. And I think you'll see that as the author kind of works through the cultural impact that Egypt had in throughout the African continent. Later on, the author runs through each of the other kind of North African Arab countries and their leaders at the time. I found especially interesting the portrait he paints of Bourguiba, who was the leader of Tunisia for most of the 20th century. And he draws a really effective contrast between Bourguiba and Nasser. And I think that with hindsight, it's really interesting to see just how the leadership styles of the impacted the two countries. Especially when we consider that whereas Egypt has kind of it's calling it a basket case is too strong, but the 21st century has been it's had trouble finding a consistent political wheelhouse, and Tunisia has really been kind of developing as an integral member of the liberal world order. And so when we get to the section on Tunisia, I think that's very interesting. So this video is going to be just the book's introduction and the first chapter. And with that, let's jump right on in. Introduction. For centuries, Africa has been rigorously divided into two unrelated parts: White Africa, Arabic and Muslim, and Black Africa, that voluptuous variety of tribes and racial groups belonging to Islam, Christianity, and animism. Historians as well as journalists regularly refer to the two Africas, one north of the Sahara, the other south. Yet this distinction, however pertinent in the past, is no longer altogether valid. With time, indeed, it will go on losing its validity, until in the end its distinctions nearly disappear. New political concepts, neutralism, socialism, and the tendency towards vast regroupings across national frontiers, are influencing even greater numbers on both sides of that border which the Sahara has for so long represented. A common struggle for political emancipation has brought African nationalists together, Arabs and Negroes alike, impelling them to join their efforts. One cannot clap with only one hand is an old Arab proverb. Since 69% of all the Arabs live in Africa, it was inevitable that Arab nationalism should sooner or later meet with its African counterpart. The Arabs have been in Africa for many hundreds of years. They first settled in the continent during the 7th century, and steadily they have forged their multiple links with Black Africa. Above all, they introduced Islam, which spans the Sahara today like an enormous bridge, joining Kano to Casablanca, Tunis to Dar es Salaam. There are now many independently predominantly Muslim countries in Black Africa. The Islamic universities of the Arab states, and especially the 1,000-year-old Al-Azhar University in Cairo, attract thousands of students each year from Africa south of the Sahara. And yet Islam itself seems unable to cement on its own even the old Muslim states. Religion is often enough used for political purposes. The enormous efforts made by an Arab country like Egypt to spread Islam into Africa are celebrated. But religious affinities, however important they may be, prove fragile to the pressure of political or economic conflict. It is mainly on political and social grounds, therefore, that black and white African nationalists endeavor to base their cooperation. Cairo's Arab nationalists imported positive neutralism, as defined at Bandung in April 1955, into Africa. They were the first in the continent to promote a policy of balance between the West and the communist bloc. Today, African Arabs display an increasing desire to tighten their relationship with Negroes. Arab activity in Africa has indeed been considerable during the last few years. The string of Arab states stretching from the Atlantic to Sinai now consider themselves a part of Africa as well as of the Ummah, the Arab nation, with their future tied to that of the rest of the continent. Because the Arab world stands astride the African and Asian continents, many of its leaders believe themselves logically destined to become the binding link between the two. Gamal Abdel Nasser gives Egypt two historical missions: to rebuild Arab unity from the Atlantic Ocean to the Persian Gulf, and to lead the African nationalist movement in its, quote, struggle against colonialism. It is not easy to analyze the interrelations of these states and their place in the general African scene, especially as both the Arab and the African peoples are still passing through a period of profound upheaval. This book, therefore, makes no pretensions to providing an exhaustive examination. All it offers is a broad outline, leaving the interested reader to search out the details for himself. Indeed, the Arab role in Africa is quite a controversial issue, and the author normally expects some objections, maybe some protests, to be raised here and there. Nevertheless, he sincerely hopes that his book will be a contribution, if only a modest one, to what he believes to be above all an open discussion. Such a discussion must necessarily take into account the evolution which has shaped the concept of Arab nationalism over the last decades. The Arab role in Africa is indeed closely connected with this evolution, and whatever opinion one may hold on its importance, Arab political influence in Africa has become an undisputed reality. Chapter 1: Islam in the Changing Map of Africa. The Arab presence in Africa is an undeniable reality. White Africa is essentially Arabic, stretching in the north of the continent from the Atlantic Ocean to Mount Sinai. And Arabs are found in Black Africa as well, intermingled with other races. Their language is spoken not only in various white African countries, but also in black ones, like the Sudan and Somalia. Their religion, Islam, has now several million adepts in white and black countries alike. The links of the Arab world with Africa are several centuries old. They date back to a time when, before the advent of Islam, the people living in Arabia monopolized all trade between East Africa and Asia. Up to the 1st century AD, the Arabs from the Yemen provided India with African goods, and were also the main connecting link between East Africa and Ethiopia on one hand, and the Persian, Greek, and Roman civilizations on the other. Arab immigration to East Africa persisted in the pre-Islamic period. Numerous Yemenis and other Arabs from Hijaz went to settle in Ethiopia, Somalia, and along the East African coast. The desert track towards the north was also known to the Arabs. Long before Islamic times, traders crossed the Sinai and traveled to the Nile Delta to bring back enthusiastic descriptions of what they found. The true eruption of the Arabs into Africa, however, dates from the beginning of the Islamic era. To the cries of Allahu Akbar, Allah is most great, the Muslims regions swept into Africa, under one of the most brilliant generals of Islam, Amr ibn al-As, in 640, 8 years after Muhammad's death. The Prophet had left his successors, the Rashidun, the wise, with a valuable heritage, a united Arabia, and unshakable faith in the rapid victory of the new religion. You will go and take the word of Allah everywhere in the world, he told them, and Islam soon passed from the word to the sword. The Prophet had sent messages to many sovereigns inviting them to adopt the new faith and to submit to Allah's will. His conviction grew stronger. The word of Allah would be reached to the foreigner, the Rumi, even if blood had to be shed. When Amr ibn al-As crossed the Sinai from Palestine and marched into Africa at the head of his Bedouin cavalry, he fully understood the gravity of his mission. He was already on his way towards the Nile Valley when a messenger from Caliph Omar, second successor to the prophet, caught up with him. Afraid that the message might command him to give up his plans, Amr decided to put off reading it. It was only when he had reached far into the desert that he finally opened it. If my message ordering you to turn back from Egypt reaches you before entering any part of it, then turn back. But if you entered the land before, then proceed with Allah's help. The Arab victory was swift. Arab historians are always keen to emphasize that their faith, their eagerness in battle, overcame opponents who were far more numerous and better equipped. For Ramah, Belbis, Memphis, and soon Alexandria were taken by the Muslim troops. The Arabs destroyed the power of the Byzantines and settled in Egypt. Their armies, increased by many fresh battalions from Arabia, advanced to the south of the Nile Valley and down to the gates of Nubia. With Egypt conquered, the Arabs advanced west along the coast. Tripolitania, Cyrenaica, and what is known today as the Maghreb were invaded. As early as 681, the Muslim general-in-chief Uqba ibn Nafi reached the Atlantic coast. Thus, 13 centuries before Nasser, the Arab Empire already extended from the Persian Gulf to the Atlantic Ocean. The Arabs had achieved an objective, which has often been recalled in the past 10 years. Pushing his steed into the waters, throwing up his sword towards heaven, Uqba exclaimed, "God of Muhammad, if I knew a land should exist beyond these waters, I would go there and carry the glory of thy name." But the Islamic conquest had established a fragile dominion. The Islamization of local populations in North Africa, for instance, was at first only superficial, since many among those who embraced the new faith did not strictly abide by its precepts. Amr's soldiers, as well as their successors, won numerous North African Berbers over to Islam, but did not succeed in assimilating or Arabizing them. The strength of the huge Muslim empire was not in keeping with its dimensions. It was soon torn apart by rivalries, its various Muslim governors, far from any authority but their own, showing an ever-decreasing obedience to the caliphs. Much more slowly than it had climbed to the heights, Islam started to lose ground. Though Islam was to endure many fluctuations of fortune in this vast continent, in many places it had over the centuries taken deep root. Nothing could now dislodge it. Its history in Africa was to be one of continual advances and retreats, sometimes bitter and ruthless, sometimes pacific. In many places, above all in Negro Africa, Muslims were faced with obstacles, many of which they still have not been able to overcome. Yet throughout, warriors, merchants, or missionaries of the new faith kept succeeding one another, preaching the Quran either by the sword or by the word. In Egypt, Islam triumphed almost completely. Dissatisfied with Byzantium, Egypt welcomed Amr's soldiers as saviors, while many of the local Christians eventually embraced the new faith. In North Africa, the fiercest resistance to Islam came from the pagan Berbers, who bitterly fought the new conquerors rather than from the Christians. Once having submitted to Islam, however, they became its fiercest warriors. Their passionate character made it difficult for the Berbers to accept the Orthodox faith, and they joined one of the greatest schisms of Islam, Kharijism, which was to lead to still further massacres and battles. The Arab occupation of the Maghreb was thus marked by fire and by bloodshed. Resistance was also to face Islam in the south of the Nile Valley, where Christian kingdoms kept the Muslim soldiers at bay. Central Sudan was to surrender only between the 14th and the 16th centuries, and Christian Ethiopia then fought on alone. Cut off from the sea by the Islamization of the Horn of Africa, it has maintained through the centuries up till the present day its own symbolic challenge to Islam. Meanwhile, permanent Muslim cities grew: Fez, Kairouan, Fustat. The United Arab Empire in Africa did not outlive the Umayyad caliphs of the 8th century. Autonomous kingdoms rose and fell with the hazards of war and fortune. In the Maghreb, several kingdoms were swept away by the Fatimids, a powerful Shiite dynasty from Lesser Kabylia, who had settled in Egypt and founded Al-Qahira, the victorious, to become Cairo, the capital. They extended their sovereignty to North Africa and initiated a golden age in Egypt that was to last for 2 centuries. The Fatimids were responsible for Al-Azhar University, which so many Muslims still consider the center of religious education in the Islamic world today. Cairo's famous libraries, and an unprecedented development in literature, the arts, and theology. With the end of their power in the 12th century, and that of their successors, the Ayyubids, this period of Islamic glory in northeast Africa also ended. A new era opened, marked once more by civil wars and coups d'etat. When the Mamluks took power in Egypt, the country was no longer capable of resisting any invasion. The Turks finally occupied Cairo in 1517. Stopped by Christian Ethiopia, Islam skirted the empire by sea. For centuries, merchants and adventurers from Arabia and Persia landed in East Africa and established commercial cities. Some of these still exist today, of which Zanzibar, a replica of Muscat, is the most striking example. But other names are also celebrated. Mogadishu, the capital of the present Somali Republic, Mombasa, and Pemba. The crescent was carried to the Comoro Islands and Madagascar. Islam even reached Mozambique, where a Muslim community still lives nowadays along the coast. The Arab invasion of East Africa was, for the most part, peaceful and greatly differed from the furious campaigns of Amr and Uqba. Arab slave hunters were, however, to leave behind them memories of a fearful cruelty. Contrary to their practice in North Africa and Egypt, the Arabs mainly concentrated on securing riches in this part of Africa, contenting themselves with commercial cities, which sometimes acquired a political role. In this, the Arabs proved their ability to adapt to circumstances. For centuries, a mercantile Islam thrived in East Africa. The Arab Africanists regard the mercantile infiltration of their ancestors into East Africa as very significant. One of them, the Egyptian doctor Ibrahim al-Adwi, wrote, "None contributed more than the Arab nation to the economic and political progress of East Africa. And so it follows that between Arabs and the East African people, the bonds should be strong. Today, East Africa follows the example of the Arab Renaissance, striving to recover its freedom, the greatness of its past, the glory it had already known at the time of its first contact with the Arab countries." The discovery of the Cape of Good Hope in 1488 by Bartholomew Dias, however, and the landing of the first Portuguese on the East African coast a quarter of a century later, were to give Islam there a fatal blow. The Egyptian dynasties collapsed one after the other. Islamic North Africa fell more and more into anarchy. Then, in the 11th century, there arose in Morocco a strict and rigorous dynasty, the Almoravids, under whom Islam blossomed again. 4 centuries after Amr, the Almoravid legions galloped towards the reconquest of North Africa, entered Spain, and attempted to recreate the former Muslim empire. But the Almoravids also withered into decay. The Almohads, members of a tribe from Morocco, followed to spread its splendor of Islam through North Africa. They unified its inhabitants under a powerful dynasty, but this too met with the common fate and finally collapsed. On its ruins, several dissenting kingdoms tried to establish themselves and for centuries fought bitterly with one another. It was natural that the first Muslim Arabs coming from the deserts of Arabia should gaze hungrily at the green lands, first Egypt and the Maghreban coast, and then the riches of Spain. But as the centuries went by, Muslims penetrated into the heart of Africa too, and from Egypt and North Africa tried to reach the continent's western flank. Commercial, as well as their greed for more slaves, stimulated them to develop their mercantile relations with these regions. In the 11th century, Muslim raiders from Egypt reached Lake Chad, following a route across oases that was often used afterwards by Egyptian Muslim traders, one of the 4 routes joining Egypt with the rest of the continent. Some of these traders even got as far as the Congo and the Great Lakes, but in sporadic raids rather than for permanent occupation. They stopped on the outskirts of a jungle, which was never won over to Islam. In the beginning, therefore, Muslim proselytizing in Black West Africa was mainly the traders' work. and then a new factor intervened, which enabled Islam to advance more smoothly into West Africa: the marabouts. These schismatic Muslim priests from North Africa, who dedicated themselves to studying the Quran and teaching their religion's orthodox precepts, assumed a sudden importance. At first insignificant, maraboutism was to become the main vehicle of Islam in West Africa, spreading out of Mauritania to the south. Through the centuries, Islam managed to make its way into West Africa, and several Muslim kingdoms sprang up there. In the middle of the 11th century, the reigning family of the Mali Empire turned to Muslim, and 3 centuries later, at the height of its power, Mali covered an enormous area. Yet Islam had not won over the masses and was still limited to the ruling families. Ulema, i.e. Muslim doctors of theology, and commentators of the Quran, meanwhile, came to the empire in great numbers, especially from Egypt and Morocco. One of the kings, Gango Musa, devoted himself to the strengthening of links with the Oriental Arabs, traveling on a pilgrimage to Mecca as well as to Cairo. Timbuktu became a religious center, and Islam spread to what is now known as the Mali Republic, as well as parts of Niger and Nigeria. The Songhai went over to Islam during the 11th century and settled around Gao on the Niger River. Their powerful vassals were powerful vassals within the Mali Empire. Rebelling against their king, they founded a rival state on the Niger and invaded Timbuktu, growing in power to a peak under Mamadou Touré, who created a vast and relatively modern empire. The Crescent became all-powerful, feared and envied over an area as large as France. The renown of Timbuktu grew greater and greater. For the first time in Africa's history, Negro cities competed with the white Islamic centers of Kairouan, Fez, or Cairo. Mamadou Touré went to Mecca on pilgrimage and then to Cairo, where he achieved the unprecedented diplomatic victory of being recognized as the Sudan Caliph. Contact between Negro Africa and Egypt was solidly established during his reign. Other dynasties emerged, and a few achieved a passing glory, but most dissolved into chaos. Then Islam had to face a new force, the white man, the European. Paradoxically, perhaps, the Western colonizers did not seriously oppose Islam. In French West Africa, for instance, probably because of their fear of the primitiveness of animism, they even came to regard the conversions of pagans to Islam as a means toward easier administration. Islam was familiar to them. They had already encountered it in North Africa, and it did not seem to represent any threat. With the development of 20th century nationalist movements, especially in Egypt and the Maghreb, Islam became more attractive to animist Africans, namely those in West Africa. Communications, and especially broadcasting, made contacts easier between the east and the west coast of Africa, as well as between North Africa and the western regions. Furthermore, Islam was not preached by whites, by people who had the same skin color as the colonizing soldiers and administrators. Those who preached the Prophet's words were mostly Africans, the colonized themselves. Colonialism helped to shatter the framework of African animist society, and Islam took advantage of this. The marabouts, Muslim hermits who still enjoy strong influence in North Africa, never hesitated to suit Mohammedism to local conditions, so that it might be the more easily acceptable. Without being deeply assimilated, Islam is all the more quickly adopted, as the preacher does not demand more than a formal profession of faith. A conversion to Christianity must often be preceded by a somewhat lengthy preparation, rather reluctantly assimilated by animists. In other words, Islam appears as an African or Afro-Asian religion, whereas Christianity seems essentially both white and European. Indeed, during the last few decades, Islam has registered spectacular progress in Africa. The famous American evangelist Billy Graham, back from a visit to Africa, once stated, "I have met a number of people who think Africa may eventually be overwhelmed by Islam. The alarm has sounded in many parts of the Christian world. A Catholic authority cried, Catholic missions in Africa would do well to take stock of the present situation concerning Islam. The facts speak for themselves." Some people openly speak of a reconquest of Africa by Islam as spectacular as the 7th century movement, though this time by peaceful advance. Do the facts speak for themselves? According to some estimates, at least 1 African in 4 nowadays is Muslim. Others even claim that the ratio is 1 in 3, that the number of Muslims in Africa reached 80 or 90 millions out of a total population of 275 million in 1960. Since statistics vary with their source, it is unwise to be categorical. What remains indisputably significant is that in the whole history of the Black Continent, the proportion of African Muslims has never been greater than today, and this proportion is everywhere expected to rise. In 1980, half of Africa may well be Muslim. This increase has taken place among Negro Africans. Some journalistic sources claim that for every African who turns from pagan gods to Christianity, an estimated 10 become Muslims. It is generally believed that, during the last 20 years, the number of Muslims has doubled from 44 million. This leap, which has surprised many authorities, is partly the result of countless individual conversions in areas formerly considered inaccessible to Islam. The traditional barriers of paganism, or Christianity, which were thought to represent the extreme limits of Islam, have been crossed and occasionally removed altogether. In Mali, for instance, in several districts formerly regarded as animist, the number of Muslims is twice what it used to be 15 years ago. The Vatican has complained that the Mali government is hampering the Catholic missionaries while favoring Islamic expansion. Yet Mali is a secular country, as its constitution clearly underlines. In Senegal, a similar phenomena has been remarked. A French Africanist, V. Montaille, cites Senegalese villages, today Islamic, where hardly a quarter of a century ago, the stool on which a Muslim traveler had sat was burnt after his departure. In the Sudan, the division between the Muslim areas in the north and the pagan and Christian ones in the south is becoming less rigid, more difficult to trace with complete accuracy on a map. Since his coming to power in November 1958, General Aboud has seemed eager to Islamize the southern region, whereas his immediate predecessors had not shown anything like similar energy. The missionary schools have been nationalized in the south, and 2 Catholic priests were arrested in 1960, while 40 others have been expelled after having been accused of, quote, endangering the state. Since 1958, entry visas have more or less systematically been refused to priests to replace those who have died or fallen ill. Former Southern Sudanese members of parliament have reportedly been obliged to take refuge abroad. Some observers are positive. This persecution of the church in the south of the Sudan is primarily designed to hasten the Islamization of an area where separatist trends have always threatened the country's unity. The expansion of Islam would help to achieve the complete integration of the South. In Uganda and Tanganyika, Catholic missionaries speak of an Islamic threat. In Tanganyika, the only party opposed to the ruling Tanganyika African National Union is under Muslim leadership, the Tanganyika African National Congress, whose chairman, Zuberi Mtevu, is an admirer of Gamal Abdel Nasser. The demand for authority of the Kenya coastal strip has a partly religious origin as well, since this area, unlike the rest of the country, is largely inhabited by Muslims. In general, therefore, Islam is advancing in Africa, both north and south of the tropics. Today, the Muslim areas form a wide stretch of land from Senegal to Somalia. Until the end of the last war, Egypt was the only independent Muslim country in Africa. Since then, other countries with the majority of Muslim inhabitants have become sovereign. Libya, Sudan, Morocco, Tunisia, Guinea, Mali, Chad, Somalia, Niger, and the Islamic Republic of Mauritania. In their constitution, some of them, like Somalia and Morocco, proudly proclaim Islam to be the state religion. Others declare themselves to be secular states, although the majority of their population is Muslim. Northern Nigeria almost presents the picture of another Saudi Arabia, in the heart of Africa, where Islam is all-powerful. Muslim law is applied, sometimes in its most primitive form, and enforced by an omnipotent Islamic aristocracy. Here too the crescent is advancing, despite the rigorous application of its precepts. A Muslim caught drinking alcohol may be arrested and flogged. Arab influence partly accounts for this advance of Islam. In some French-speaking African countries, the teaching of Arabic is spreading fast. The number of Muslim Negroes who visit Mecca constantly increases. In 1960, it reached unprecedented figures: 15,536 from Nigeria and Niger, 5,176 from the Sudan, 2,085 from Senegal, 1,059 from Somalia, and the rest of East Africa. In the former French Sudan itself, the number of Arab-speaking people is thought to touch 200,000. In Nigeria, Arabic script is used in several areas to transcribe those local languages without an alphabet of their own. In Senegal, the Arab alphabet is increasingly being used in the Quranic schools. Arabic dialects are spoken, either as first or second languages, not only in the Arab African countries, Egypt, Libya, the Maghreb, but also in the Sudan and in certain parts of Nigeria, Senegal, Chad, Zanzibar, Kenya, Somalia. This influence is the result of historical links, sometimes more than 1,000 years old. Today, the Arabs want this influence to take a political form as well. In the writings of Arab specialists on African affairs, the impact of Arab nationalism on Black Africa is always emphasized. In a survey of the movements towards Black emancipation, the Egyptian review Nahdu Ifriqiya declares, "Everyone now realizes how decisive the influence of the Arab world has been on the African continent, and how much Africa has responded to its liberating call. Indeed, this should not come as a surprise. Centuries ago, the Arabs already represented civilization, progress, and knowledge to the Africans." Nahdu Ifriqiya means African Awakening and first appeared in Cairo in October 1957. It is published by the Egyptian Information Service and aims at developing the African national conscience. The political and cultural influence of the Arabs appears clearly in Somalia, and in a more subdued way throughout East Africa. On Egyptian maps, Somalia is still represented as belonging to the Arab world. In issue number 101 of the Arab World, 1959, published in Geneva by the Arab League Secretariat, a portion of Eritrea and French Somaliland, as well as the whole of Chad, Senegal, Mali, Mauritania, and a part of Niger, are also shown as Arab. The Cairo press fully expected the Somali Republic to join the Arab League on gaining its independence in 1960. Indeed, Muslim and Arab are often considered interchangeable terms by some Arab nationalists. Whereas President Nasser speaks of the Arab mission in Africa, Abbas Mahmoud El-Akkad, a well-known Egyptian journalist and publicist, writes, "Islam is endowed with the mission of liberating Africa from imperialism. In the same way as Cairo looks towards Africa, so Muslim Africa often looks towards Cairo as the main center of Islam in Africa, if not the whole world. In Kenya, for instance, in August 1961, the head of the Kenya African Muslim Political Union, Sheikh Ali Gunda Sinada, said he would ask for Egypt's assistance in order to speed up the development of Kenya's Muslim masses." Today, Islam is distributed across Africa according to the fortunes which through the centuries befell those who, of their free will or not, chose the faith. To start with, African Muslims do not constitute a homogeneous whole, but a mosaic of schisms and peoples with more or less marked political and ideological differences. Islam in Africa seems to be an aspiration more than a political and historical reality, a sort of confused sentiment which makes many traditional Muslims in Cairo, Tunis, Kano, Bamako, or Mogadishu say, "We are all Muslims, and we must abide by the religious precept. Support thy brother, should he be just or unjust. Unsar akaka zaliman au mazluman." Several different groups stand out among the Muslim countries of Africa, but their respective influence, their power of attraction over the continent and the world, varies not only with their size, but also with the policy, the dynamism of their leaders, and their role in international affairs. Egypt, in spite of the breakup of the United Arab Republic, is a dynamic and influential force in Africa. There, since 1952, a republican regime has existed with Arab nationalism as one of the main points in its political program. There, too, Islam is undergoing important changes, which even reach Al-Azhar University, the center of orthodoxy. Women have now secured some political rights. Many of them have the right to vote and to be elected. The Constitution no longer proclaims Islam as the state religion. The extreme poverty of the past and today's brilliant oil expectations keep the Senussi Kingdom of Libya from the Arab nationalist mainstream. But along with wealth, the oil is bound to bring Libya scores of difficulties. Mainly, it will drive the bourgeoisie of Tripolitania to intensify its fight against the monopoly of the ruling nomads from Cyrenaica, embodied in the present Senussi monarchy. On the other hand, the Algerian conflict and its consequences are the keynotes in North Africa's situation. The three Arab countries of North Africa, Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia, all aspire to a united Maghreb. Nevertheless, there exist strong differences among them. Tunisia is leading a vigorous campaign for the modernization of Islam, which arouses local opposition among the traditionalists and strong criticisms abroad. On the other hand, Tunisia is reluctant to belong to any African bloc. Africa's unity is not for tomorrow. Tunisia is wary of all isms, said President Bourguiba, explaining his reservations. In Morocco, where Islam in its rigorous aspect is still dominant, the first signs of modernism, under local and external pressures, are increasingly evident. A mixture of autocracy, feudalism, and tribalism with, paradoxically enough, modernism and tolerance, Hassan II's Morocco is still feeling her way in the African labyrinth. Finally, in Algeria, more than 7 years of war have deeply transformed the country. The Muslim nationalist revolution has temporarily united Orthodox ulemas with atheist revolutionaries. What will be tomorrow's Algeria? To these differences among the Maghreban countries must be added other difficulties created by their separate progressions to independence. The problems of the Sahara and Mauritania are typical examples. The common denominator of Negro Islam lies in its very heterogeneousness. Nothing deep unites the Muslims of Somalia with those of Senegal except their common faith, which is, moreover, variously interpreted from place to place. In the same way, a greater similarity can be noticed between Egyptian and Sudanese Muslims, generally called Nilotic Islam, than between Sudanese and Guineans, for instance. The map of Africa is far from static. It changed continuously through the centuries, was made and unmade. Today, once more, it is undergoing a profound revolution, with new concepts, new philosophies, new slogans: neutralism, Pan-Africanism, Arab nationalism, socialism, communism. Will Muslim Arabs adapt themselves to these new conditions, as they did so skillfully in the past?